James. Welcome to Let's Get Real.
Hey, Nina. Thanks for having me.
It's so great. Wow, we've been planning this for a while. And when I met you inside an organization where I was doing some work, I just, we were talking about other things, but I'm so glad that I discovered all this cool work you're doing around climate and indigenous wisdom.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it was a great seminar that you were leading for us. I appreciate meeting you there.
Yeah, yeah. So why don't we start with, I'm so curious because you have a career in consulting, but you have a background in environmental work. And so how do you blend those two very disparate? Because of course, I always want to know how people are creating change where it matters to them and where they feel a sense of purpose. So I'm really curious for our listeners to know more about how you blend sustainability and business and all the great projects that you work on.
Yeah, for me, this is going to be somewhat of a preambulatory answer, so I apologize in advance. But really, it kind of comes down to storytelling. Storytelling, advocacy, and really kind of a holistic approach to problem solving. Through consulting, in my background, one of the things I've really come to realize is that data and facts, while they're very critical, making decisions and leading insights that lead to decisions, but not. They're not always enough to instigate action. To me, what I have found both in my work and in others, the arts, whether it's in film, literature, visual arts, what it might be, really has a stronger ability oftentimes to convey complex environmental issues in a way that resonates emotionally with people. I think when you hit the emotions, that's a good way to incite action. So by blending my environmental background with the arts, I've been able to advocate for sustainability and conservation in a more compelling, really kind of more of a human centric way.
I think this won't be a surprise to our listeners because in season 3, we did a whole season on climate, and our last guest was a wonderful leader from the Drawdown Project, and his main goal is marketing communication, and he does storytelling. Basically, his whole job is going around the country and finding people who are doing environmental work in different cities in the United States and telling their story. And it is more compelling. It kind of hits that emotional piece that we need, and not just the anxiety that we get from talking about climate change, but the hopefulness that we can create from being in conversations with people.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, eco anxiety is a thing. It's one of the new buzzwords we hear around now, and it's like our situation, though it is critical. We are in a crisis. It's not. It can be overcome. There's optimism. Yeah. We can go. So and I think through storytelling, in ways, spinning it positively, I think that's a better way to incite action. For a larger group of people.
Absolutely.
So, both in the consulting world, and in the storytelling world as well.
Yes. So you're a sustainability leader, and we're going to talk a lot more about your work as a cultural geographer and your work as an explorer, which is kind of the main focus, I think, of this conversation. But you live in Montana, and Montana has kind of a mixed record for environmentalism. Like, what is that like? Like, are there a bunch of environmentalists around that I just am not aware of because I live in Seattle? I live in the blue bubble.
Yeah. I also lived in that blue bubble for a while before moving out to Missoula. I live in Missoula, Montana. And what you say, I think, is quite accurate across the state. We've had successes, and we've had what I would consider utter failures in the environmental and cultural sphere as well. Missoula, where I live, the town I live in, it's a bit more bent toward environmental sustainability practices.
It's a college town, right?
It's a college town, yeah. So Missoula and Bozeman, I'd say, are kind of the two small, in my world, there will be enclaves of good, good and hope.
So you have my bias. Okay.
I have bias. I do have bias.
Just
full
like
disclosure. But Montana, it's the neat thing about Montana is, no matter what side of the fence you're on with regarding the environment or regarding social equality, everyone's open. I've come across people who on the surface I would never get along with. You think we would live complete opposite circles, but we're able to have really good conversations because the culture here Though it's really strong and rooted in their beliefs,
Yeah.
Montanans, they are open to dialogue. They're open to hear your
Yeah.
story and what you have to say. So there is an openness here. But
That's
what
awesome.
draws me to Montana really is less about that. It's really about just the natural beauty, the outdoor lifestyle, the
Yeah.
agricultural heritage, but also the
Mm.
cultural diversity and the Native American heritage here. Here in
Oh,
Montana, we have several Native American tribes. Each their own rich history and culture. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of see those a little bit closer and learn a lot more. From their lived experience and their knowledge they've developed over the ages.
yeah. And now a lot of parts of the country have tribal land, but it sounds like in Montana that people are there's either more people or they have a better way of not a better way, but they're not buried underneath all of the city life or whatever, right? Because there's so much more natural world. Is that right? Or what do you think helps Native Americans thrive in Montana or Native
Thriving, it
American
might be a
culture?
challenging word to say. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess
because
that's true.
they may disagree that they're thriving here,
Right,
but
right.
there is more discourse here, and it
Mm,
could be the exposure, it could be the
mm-hmm,
proximity,
mm-hmm.
there's a lot of groups around, who are, a lot of indigenous groups who are doing really great efforts and great work in promoting, the tribal well-being here. But there's also a lot of good, strong allies in Montana as well. Like for instance, a lot of the road signs you see as you're driving, through around in and around Missoula and also up the Flathead Valley, are printed in both, English and their tribal language at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh,
just trying to
cool.
build recognition, build
Yeah.
awareness.
And
Really.
visibility, right? And just,
Visibility.
yeah,
Yeah, great way to say it.
yeah. Cool. Well, I want our listeners to hear firsthand from you about your passion project, or kind of what I call we all do work for pay, and sometimes we think the work we do for pay is our career, but it sounds like you have a whole second career or leadership project around talking to Indigenous folks and in the intersection between Indigenous wisdom and climate. So tell our listeners a little bit more about your passion projects.
Yeah. It's and passion is the absolute right word for it. It started a long time ago. After grad school, I had a stint with the United Nations. And I lived and worked in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where I was able to
Mm,
work with some tribes there, some groups there, some indigenous groups there. And it just really, as a cultural geographer, one of the things that fascinates me, is it really is the global cultural fabric. How different we are, the beauty of that difference, but also how similar we all are. Also,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
interplays between those. How does the natural environment shape that? How does history shape that? Neighboring communities shape that. The whole ecosystem of the culture, if you will. Um, but through that work, I had decided early on to write a book around these things. My aim was to travel to these communities, around the world, just not just Africa, not just the Himalaya, and not just North America, but really try to get a global representation of indigenous communities around the world to see how they're coping with climate change, and to see
mm,
what we can ascertain in Western science, from traditional ecological knowledge and traditional knowledge, to help us develop solutions toward climate change.
mm,
So it's just been fascinating. I mean, it's you visit these communities, and their worldview, their paradigm is so different than the way we think here. It's just, I mean, it's I wouldn't say deeper. That's not a fair assessment, but it is. It's not as linear, I would say. In their
mm.
assessment. So it just really kind of shaped me, and help me see how interconnected, a lot of our well, everything is. How interconnected culture is with climate. How interconnected, tradition and religion is with climate change and biodiversity loss. And it's been fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure it's a simplification, but it actually resonates with me, this idea that they're less linear or that we're more linear. I guess is another way to say it. So rather than talk about them, but just talk about white culture is more linear. And it's so interesting because I'm a facilitator by training and by background, and that's my one of my main gigs. And everything that we know about solids facilitation is about being less linear and more kind of what we call theory U, like in the presence of of what's emerging. And it
Yeah.
feels like it's one of those things where it's been around way longer than we've been acknowledging it as, the dominant culture, that the way to really access the best wisdom, knowledge is actually to see the whole, right? And I don't know how well, let's just get really specific. So you just got back from a trip
Yeah.
to Tajikistan. I
Tajikistan.
couldn't
Yeah.
get that right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you were with a couple of groups there.
Yes.
Tell me about like what you saw and what was most inspiring to you about being with these folks.
Yeah. So I was in Tajikistan. It's in of course Central Asia.
Mm-hmm.
It shares a border with Afghanistan to the south, China to the east, uh, Kyrgyzstan to the north, and Uzbekistan to the west. So it's a landlocked country.
Okay.
Um, and it's a Muslim country. Predominantly Sunni in the west. And Shia.
Mm-hmm.
Ismaili Shia in the east mostly, which is
Mm-hmm.
a sect that kind of is closely related to Aga Khan. It, he's an imam, through the lineage of Muhammad and Ali, just a long lineage. But it's a sect of Shia Islam called in Ismaili, led by Aga Khan, and it's very different in the east and the west in that sense. But the groups I was there with, that I was working with, are the Wahi, and the
Mm-hmm.
Pamiri, and also in the once it got to Murgab, the Kyrgyz minorities, and they're all predominantly of the Ismaili sect, and they're it's different religious, some of their fundamental beliefs. It's still Islam, but they differ slightly from Sunni Islam, just in some of their practices and some of their ritualistic works that they do. But they're nomads, so they live half of
Mm.
the year in one area. In the summertime they live in lower elevation, higher elevations. Wintertime
Got
they
it.
live in lower elevations, and they're yak herders and cattle farmers mostly. Pastoralists, and they grow a lot of root vegetables, like potatoes and whatnot. I mean, these people are at 13,000 feet, is where the community's
Mm.
at. So there's not a ton that goes up there, which is
Right.
part of why they're so susceptible to climate change, actually.
Oh.
Um, but a really fascinating culture. It's this rich blend of a Soviet legacy, of
Ah.
Islam, of traditional agropastoral belief
Yes.
practices, and it's
Yes.
just a really rich. Different languages. It's a really interesting group.
Yeah. Even you sharing that they're a Muslim, that they've adopted Muslim as their religion is eye opening for me because, again, as a Westerner urban person, we tend to stereotype indigenous folks and think they're still living like it's the 19th century or
Yeah, right.
something, right?
Yeah.
Right.
The
So
classic
you've been,
homogenized indigenous trope that they're all the same
oh my
thing, right?
gosh, yeah, and I'm as
Right.
guilty of it as the next person. So I so
Sure. No more.
appreciate just being able to have this conversation with you to bust some of my own stereotypes and assumptions. But so yeah, so how do you get permission from the group to come in and be? I assume it's like ethnography in the sense that you're with the people and you're just living the life. You're not like you're not like doing interviews necessarily, or like how do you
Yeah,
get
no,
permission to go in?
no. I do interviews. A
Okay,
lot of
cool.
times. Yeah, yeah. So what I'll do a lot of times, ahead of time, and I have contacts all throughout the world. So I have a lot of
Yeah,
help in this. I'm
yeah,
not just kind of show up and say, hey,
yeah.
want to talk about climate change? it's
Right,
it's a little more
right.
complicated than that. But usually the way I do it is I arrange a homestay with
Mm,
one of the village elders, or one of the village
yes.
leaders there, and that's usually who I conduct my interviews with. So I'll stay, and there. I mean, 100% of my time, I've never had a bad experience with this. People, I mean, it's like these groups are so hospitable, like almost uncomfortably hospitable.
Yeah.
But it's usually over dinner, or over tea,
Mm,
butter tea in Bhutan. Um, we just do exactly what we're doing right now. We just start talking, just starting to have a
yeah.
conversation. We talk politics, we talk faith and religion and climate,
Mm,
and the future of their progeny. What did their ancestors see versus what you're seeing versus what are your hopes for the future
yeah.
generations. We just simply start talking.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, it's probably too soon to draw conclusions from your most recent trip, but what are some of the themes that you're uncovering or that you talk about in your book? Because you also have a book, right?
Yeah, well, book coming out. It's not out
Okay.
yet. It's still in the process. But with these groups, especially, I mean, they're this area is called the roof of the world. It's kind of one of the things that they're known at because of their elevation. It's really high. It's really remote, really
Mm.
remote and barren. The soil isn't what we isn't like, ideal. So they're slight changes to that can have really detrimental impacts upon their livelihood. So
Mm.
again, as pastoralists, they're raising yak and cattle.
Right.
If what the yak and cattle feed on, if that changes, or if it changes in elevation. So for instance, as the world warms, ecosystems change by elevation. What may be growing at 10,000 feet now, because things are getting warmer, they may be raising in elevation. Now they're growing at 11,000 feet, for instance. Migration patterns and grazing patterns for their livestock changes. But one of the big issues in this area right now is because it is so glaciated. I mean, I would encourage any listener to just Google the Pamir mountain range or the Gorno-Badakhshan Autonomous Oblast, which is a province of Tajikistan. Was in absolutely beautiful. And some of the most beautiful mountains maybe you've ever seen, maybe in the world, but they're glaciated. And as these glaciers melt, it has a double impact. I
Mm.
mean, one, it can create flash floods. So it's a changing water patterns. And if these glaciers were to go away, that's their water source.
Yeah.
What's gonna water their crops? What are their livestock gonna feed on? Right? Is it going to wash away infrastructure that's been built for them for the migration patterns or for their grazing patterns for the stock, or wash away their fields?
Mm.
So glaciers are an issue in Tajikistan. I mean, but also the climate. I mean, they also depend a lot upon traditional medicines there. And as the climate's changing, some of the medicines that they've been relying on, historically, just because it's so remote, it's hard to get a lot of supplies out there. Um, they the climate may the ecosystem may be inhospitable for the growth of these medicines anymore. So they're quite vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think anytime we talk about this topic, there's moments where it just feels really sad and anxiety producing, or like, wow, this is real,
Yeah.
and we don't want to. I mean, we need to connect with the despair. I really love Joanna Macy's work in this regard. It's important. We can kind of numb out if we're not paying attention, but instead, how do we kind of confront or face these things? And you must be facing them on a regularly, because this is your project or the thing that you're wanting to bring to the world. Like,
Hmm.
how do you stay positive in the midst of these conversations and in this information that you're gathering?
Yeah, I mean, they overcome.
Mm.
I think we, like, just a little side note. Recently, I'm reading this really good book right now called Awe. And it
Oh,
just
I know. I've heard of this book. Yeah.
oh man, I highly recommend it.
Okay, cool.
It really talks about how awe differs from beauty and from fear in
Mm.
ways, and like what people are drawn to in awe is really more of an intrinsic beauty, like a moral good, like for instance
Yeah.
overcoming. For instance, right,
Mm.
rather than I got 10 figures in my bank account, or I have this new iPhone. It's a different kind of beauty.
Mm.
Um, but indigenous communities around the world, I attribute it traditional ecological knowledge and traditionalism. They overcome.
Mm.
Because they are so connected with the landscape, because they are so connected and understand seasonal patterns. They figure it out.
Yeah.
They're able to adapt. Not in all cases. Of course. I mean, sometimes it
Hmm.
happens so fast you just simply can't. There's cases in Brazil that show that. In other places like global development, it's hard to stop a road coming into your village, for instance,
Yeah.
whether you want it or not.
Right.
But a lot of times they can adapt. They're very
Mm.
resilient. And I think more resilient than what we oftentimes want to give them credit for in Western science.
Yeah.
Simply because their knowledge, we put an emphasis on counting things. Everything has to be quantitative and empirical. It's like
Yeah.
oral story, oral testimony, and lived experience oftentimes has less value in a Western scientific mindset than it does in a lot of these communities.
Yeah. Yeah. I did, I don't think a lot of people know this about me, but I did a master's program at the University of Chicago,
Hmm.
and it's very data driven, or has become very data driven, even in the soft sciences, like sociology, which is where I was focused. And, but I still found the ethnographer on
Yeah.
faculty to study with, because to me, it's a lot. I mean, my bias and my strengths are more on the big picture and on, the intuitive pieces, which you get when you're with people. It does makes the data come alive in a way, right? Makes it more real.
Totally. I mean, and it's valid, and it's necessary, and it's needed. Again, data drives insights. Insights drives
Yes.
decisions.
Mm.
But again, it's not the only solution. There
Yeah.
are other ways of tackling problems that I think need to be incorporated into our global climate problems.
Yeah,
Other voices,
absolutely.
other ideas.
Yeah. So, who do you want to reach with your documentary and your book? Is it the scientists, or is it people like me who are out there just kind of doing our thing, trying to recycle, but aren't always aware of what's going on?
It's anybody that wants to listen, pretty
Mm,
much. But
nice.
it's the documentary. It's called The End of the Road. It's really taking a look at global development in a sense, but particularly what impact does road building have on a
Mm,
really remote community.
okay.
Good and bad, like everything else. For instance, building a road community brings better access to medicines, or it makes it easier for nomadic peoples to go to market with their crops, but it also
Right.
can bring an influx of tourism in, from different cultures or different countries, different places, and kind of dilute the local cultures in some cases like that too. There's pluses and minuses to it. But really, my aim is to raise awareness. Again, we have a cultural fabric in this world that is beautiful, and the homogenization of it, to me, is one of the saddest things we can go through. So to me,
Hmm.
it's very important to travelers. If you're traveling, be respectful of the culture. Go in open. Go in with we say in Zen Buddhism, with beginner's mind, and learn. Don't be fawning. Don't have to go that way, but go in with the intent to learn, and see what you can take back, and see how that experience can change your worldview. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the documentary, is just to show that it's like, why we should care about yak herders in Bhutan. Why should we care about a yak herder in the most remote corner of Tajikistan? Well, because it impacts us. Like
Yeah.
what their experience does impact us. You know, in a, if not a small level, on a global level.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's things we can learn from them. Like what are you personally learning, and even from this most recent trip? What have been the moments for you?
This is, I hope this doesn't come across as corny or anything, but
Not
but
at
for me,
all.
the more I do this, the more I do this work, the more I realize how interconnected,
Mm,
we are as a, not just as a people, but as an organism within the earth, as we are to
mm,
the animals, the flora, the fauna, the trees, and
yes.
I think the greater understanding one builds, and these, I'm speaking for myself, of course, the greater
Mm,
understanding I gain of interconnectedness and interdependence, the broader my sense of empathy becomes. Because now
yes.
I can feel empathy for the tree that's getting cut down in the forest, or the animal that's getting abused, or the child labor that we're seeing in a lot of places in the world, or forced labor, or unfair practices in the workforce, gender inequality. I
Yes.
think it really strengthens my empathetic response, based upon my greater understanding of the interconnectedness of all of us.
Oh gosh, no, that's not at all corny from my perspective. In fact, it would be my highest dream for businesses in the corporate world, the corporate world in the United States. We have has so much power, so many
Yeah.
resources, right? And most business leaders and most executives, it seems like, and I know there are exceptions, it seems like operate like business is here and then the world is here,
Yeah.
and rather than the fact that business is actually nestled in the world, right? It's nestled in these social systems, it's nested in the environment, in the earth. We are of nature. We are not separate from nature. And so I think we know this, but for some reason we don't operate from that approach, and definitely not in business. And we
Yeah.
pretend like, we're this separate thing, and that it's this kind of mechanistic, linear view of reality that is so not real.
Yeah, I'm optimistic that that paradigm is changing a little bit, though. I mean,
Oh, good. Tell me
you know,
about that.
yeah, I
I
mean,
need that
yeah,
optimism.
we're seeing shifts in that direction. But a way to think about it is if you think of systems thinking. Most
Mm,
executives at an organization understand systems thinking because
yes.
if they're in the C-suite, they understand how a change in IT may affect change in our finance group. Or
Mm-hmm.
a different service offering in this area may require budget shifts, to accommodate the influx of new work. I mean, they understand how everything works together. So that's kind of a
Yes.
microcosm for the world. But to expand that a little bit, we have to understand that we as a business, as part of interconnectedness, we are part of the world as well. Not individually
Mm,
just, but our organization is part of the world. So
yes.
absolutely, what we do impacts the environment. Absolutely, what happens in the environment impacts our business. We see that in
Yes.
ESG. We see that as
Yes.
organizations are promoting their sustainability strategies. I think they're
Mm,
starting to get it, but
yes.
it's this concept of dual materiality, and
Yeah.
not to geek out and tech out here for a second, but
That's a very big word. Dual mutuality. Is that what you said?
dual materiality. Yeah, so it's kind of the concept.
Materiality. Cool.
An accountant understands the concept of materiality very well. It's
Yes.
it's that what impacts essentially the bottom line. Non-financial materiality is
Mm,
that which is non-financial, the benefit, the impacts essentially the bottom line. So dual materiality takes a look at what is our as a business, what is our impact upon the environment, but
mm,
also what is the impacts environment, excuse me, what is the environment's impact upon our business? And
right.
investors are really starting to take a strong look at that right now.
I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
It's like Mother Nature is knocking at the door.
Well, I mean, think of it this way. If say your business is in textiles, and one of the textiles that you one of the say garment industry, you make clothes, and one of the
Yes.
textiles that you use is cotton, and maybe you find out that or an investor finds out that you're getting your cotton from someplace in, say in Uzbekistan where child labor may be prevalent and water scarcity is an issue. You
Yeah.
find that out, and you think, oh my God, well, what if the water dries up? Or what if somebody hears that this organization is engaged in child labor? What's that going to do to our sales? All of a sudden, an
Mm,
investor says, "Hey, that's material. That impacts the value of the company. We
right.
would like to see you have more recycled cotton. We would like to see greater transparency into who is performing the labor. Where you're sourcing your cotton from, and when you're
Wow.
manufacturing your textiles. So
What a
it's got
great
an impact.
example, James. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
thanks.
really great, tangible example. Thank you for sharing that.
No sweat. Got a lot of those.
I'm so curious about what your top 5 strengths are, but you probably don't remember them offhand. But the strength, Clifton Strengths is now in my head as a coach. I can't resist it. But
Sure.
well, I am really curious, and I think our listeners would benefit from hearing about like it's very. I find it's you're very unique in your ability or your tenacity or whatever we want to call it to make time for this project, because I assume, I don't know if it's funded or not, but you have a day job, right?
I've
And
got a day job.
your day job is full
I've got a
time.
demanding day job.
You have a demanding day job. So, and I would imagine you sought out a culture where they would, give you a little flexibility. But what are your tips for people who want to have, and I think this is very true, especially for Gen Z, the newer generations coming up, like who want to do something impactful and helpful, and it may not be part of their day job. Like, how do you balance this amazing work with the fact that you also have a responsibility to your organization?
Yeah, another influence of mine,
Mm,
a professor and an author. He wrote
mm,
a book called The Hero's Journey, and a bunch of
mm.
other around. He studied mythology around the world his entire career. There was some seminal work on him. Joseph Campbell is his name.
Yes. Yes.
I would encourage another author. I would encourage everybody to
Excellent.
go out and get some books from. But his kind of one of his slogans, sayings. I'm not sure what
Hmm.
you call it, but was always follow your bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been fortunate, at least in recent times, I've been fortunate to be able to do that both in my work environment and in my passions. Why I'm able to do it is because it's what drives me. It's my passion. It's what I want to spend my free time doing because I love
Yes.
it. The growth I get from it, both intrinsically and intellectually,
Yeah.
it just shapes my worldview. So with my day job, I'm able to look at sustainability as a whole. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
able to work in ESG and help organizations, improve their environmental and social obligations. Um, in organizations they're wanting to do it. We're getting a lot of requests for it.
Yeah.
Um, it's and I feel like there's some intrinsic value to that, so I feel good about that work I'm doing too. But on the personal side, I get to explore the precise area that I'm really passionate about, which is again the knowledge we can gain from indigenous communities and very remote communities also
Yes.
around how to adapt to climate change, and how to
Mm.
work on solving the crisis,
Yeah.
and it helps me explore my arts too. So I mean, there's just a lot of it really kind of hits all six of my cylinders.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah,
awesome. I'm so happy for you and also
thanks for saying that.
inspired by you.
Thanks.
What do you think? This may be out of the domain of what's within our control, but what do you think we can? I know that the climate movement and that I'm thinking more of the advocates now than the scientists, but maybe it includes the scientists. Like, what do you think needs to happen for there to be more paying attention of indigenous experience as we look to solve this stuff? Like, how can we stop centering a certain lifestyle and a certain experience in solving these things? What do you think? Does that question make sense? Even
Um, maybe. So I asked like, what are some of the challenges of bringing indigenous knowledge like to the table?
let's start there. Yeah. What do you see as the challenges? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, they're really kind of. I mean, they're really multifaceted. They're. I mean, there's cultural challenges, methodological challenges, political, legal, resource related. But really a lot of it. Again, it's open mindedness. I think is part of where it stems down to. I mean, traditional ecological knowledge is difficult to quantify, as I mentioned
Yes.
earlier. So it's about being open to, um, science that we can't count, for instance. But
Yes.
there's also one of the approaches that we're doing too. As we're approaching climate change, across the globe, we're really looking at. I mean, I would say a top-down approach to where we're looking at like a global solutions. Like
Yeah.
what's a big solution that we can do? Like for instance, the effort to reduce carbon emissions. We're looking at that globally. Traditional ecological knowledge, usually is centered really more locally.
Yeah.
Very local. But that
Yeah.
but that knowledge is intimate.
Mm.
It's very intimate. And I think a lot of that can be extrapolated. So a lot of it is, I think, giving agency to traditional groups, to
Yeah.
indigenous groups, about bringing their thoughts to the table, and seeing
Hmm.
how we can blend Western science with traditional ecological knowledge to form a more holistic solution.
Yeah, yeah, and it might even just be recognizing their agency, right? Because I think what
Yeah,
happens
great
is we
point.
just come in and we're just like, do this
I mean,
instead of
recognizing that even though that they haven't necessarily been educated in Western institutions, they may have something really
yes,
great to say, really valuable to
yes,
say, right? Being
yes,
open to that
yeah,
possibility.
yeah, yeah. The local versus the global. What you're reminding me of is this great book that I read during the pandemic called Emergent Strategy by
Mm.
Adrienne Maree Brown. So we've got a lot of books to put in the show notes.
Yeah, sounds like it.
And she was synthesizing some of the just as it sounds, emergent strategy, some of the work of people like Meg Wheatley, and she was synthesizing it in a new way as a queer Black woman or a biracial woman. So it's just so fascinating that it's like these repeat signals of what's really needed, right? Is nonlinear thinking,
Yes.
Even the idea of fractals, like focusing on the local is a way to see the big picture, right? When we look at the little, we can see everything in a way. So
Love that. Yeah.
the leadership lessons for change are just so powerful. And so that's really cool to hear about.
Well, and I think a lot of it too, it's, again, from my experience, I can speak from, when I go in these communities, it's like, a lot of times, by the way, I'm a terrible linguist. Languages
You
don't come
speak
to
French
me.
though, right? You're
I
bilingual?
can get by. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I can order food and go to the restaurant. I can't talk philosophy or politics for sure.
Right,
But
right.
yeah,
Who
my French
can with a
is,
French person?
yeah.
That's a whole nother cultural story, though.
Totally. Yeah, it's fine. But it's a lot of times linguists will say one of the best ways to learn a language is immersion.
Mm,
And I think part of that is trying to separate the difference between like a more of a quantitative approach toward understanding versus an experiential approach toward understanding.
yes.
It's when you're experiential, you're imbuing all of your senses.
Mm.
You see, you hear, you smell, you taste, you talk, you experience pain, heat, cold. You feel it's more of a
Yeah.
sensory way of
Well,
understanding.
you're speaking to the choir over here as a coactive coach, right? Because our whole program is what we teach is all based on experiential learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all learn differently. I think that
Yes.
I think that's fair to say. But for me, the being there, it just simply makes sense. As being a leader in this field, there's a saying, as someone is going through Six Sigma, which is a process improvement and efficiency optimization procedure that a lot of organizations will go through to make their processes more efficient. But as leaders, they're to go to the Gemba, and really what that means is, you go to the ground level. If you're the executive in manufacturing, the factory company, you go to the supply, the conveyor belt where the people are packaging, right? And you talk to them, you see what they're doing, you see how to build efficiencies. For me, when I go into the field, it's the same thing. I'm seeing all these things that I'm practicing and preaching and trying to get others to understand. I'm seeing it in practice. I'm seeing that the experts, people who are living this day to day, I'm seeing how they handle that. And it's just so enlightening. I would encourage anybody in the field to do it.
That's amazing. I can hear, your commitment to it and how much you're learning, your awe,
Yeah, it
how
is.
you
Yeah, for
describe it.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. Now, it's kind of exciting. Don't you take your motorcycle on all these trips? Like, isn't that part of your whole process?
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Yeah.
necessary for the scientific discovery.
That's pretty cool.
That's
Well, that allows you to get around without a rental car, at least, right?
No, it's I tell you what, the places where a lot of these communities live, it's really damn remote. So
Yeah.
a lot of times the best way to get there is a motorcycle. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
you could take an overlanding vehicle and get there, but it'll take you twice as long, maybe longer.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, and it's just a lot more fun.
Yeah.
To be quite honest.
Absolutely. In fact, when I always ask my guests what inspires them in the pre-questions, and you mentioned Robert Pirsig, is that how you
Yeah,
pronounce his name?
yeah.
And I'd forgotten who he was until I looked him up. The
Yeah.
art of my what's the name of his book? Say it for us.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
I mean, that's a classic right there, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did that get you into motorcycles, or was it the other way around?
That's a thought.
But anyway, what do you love about his philosophy in that book?
I would say yes, actually. Now thinking, and you just
Okay.
uncovered something,
Cool.
That is
That's what we love to do in these conversations.
I think reading that book is actually what kind of got me into the motorcycles. It kind of put a different perspective on what it could be for me. Robert Pirsig, he's again, for those who haven't read the book, it's his exploration of quality, as a concept. Well, the book is really it's written in a time to where kind of the quantitative scientific method was really probably at its strongest. Businesses were making business decisions around it, and everything was just about very, very much being efficient. So he wrote this book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Basically, he's trying to show that things are mostly conceptual. So he explores quality as a concept, bridging the rational and the emotional, the scientific and the artistic. that, one isn't necessarily better than the other, but there are multiple ways of thinking about things, and to understand the more ways of understanding a thing, the
Yes.
more accurate your understanding probably is. That's really what
Uh,
opened my eyes to the potential for finding common ground
Beautiful.
between seemingly disparate ways of thinking.
Lovely, lovely. It also reminds me of quantum mechanics and
Yeah,
quantum physics because we just, Oppenheimer's in the air this summer, and
yeah,
there's
right.
so much. They have to gloss over so much of it, but I mean, that was a breakthrough in physics when we stopped viewing the observer as this objective, separate thing, right? And
Right.
I use that in my work as a facilitator also, and it's from a very hard, what you think of as a very complicated science, but conceptually, it feels like those two ideas might be even connected a little bit. So
Yeah,
very
and he
cool.
was, in my line of work, he was similar. I mean, that book actually was paradigm changing for me. I mean, because
Mm,
that's really when I started thinking like, oh wow, okay, there is more than just simply science. There might be
yes,
more out there, and it just kind of really changed the way I sought knowledge.
yes, yes. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, how can people stay connected to you, James? Because I think we're going to want to know when this book is out. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm a part of an anthology that's coming out in October. It's on persuasive leadership. So I wrote a
Oh,
chapter
great.
on using persuasive leadership and sustainability, and why,
Nice.
it's sustainability is an area where you need persuasive leadership for sure.
I think with so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's coming out in October.
Great.
But the documentary is a short. It's out now, and you can find details on both at my website, james-fountain.com.
Okay, cool. I'll put that in the show notes so people don't have to worry about writing it
Sure.
down. But
Of course,
that's
LinkedIn too. I'm
awesome.
on LinkedIn.
So, what's your favorite morning beverage?
Sometimes bourbon with a beer chaser.
That sounds amazing.
No, no. Generally, first thing I do, I wake up, have a glass of water with a lemon squeeze in it, and then I have a cup of matcha, coconut matcha.
Oh, great. Oh, good. I have a good friend who loves matcha. I'll
Yeah,
recommend
I
it.
gave up coffee.
Hmm.
It got to the point to, and probably because I keep such a busy schedule between everything I'm doing, it got to the point there
Yes.
I was just kind of drinking more coffee than I was water. So it's like this has to change.
Yes.
So matcha has a lot of caffeine also, but it's kind of like the happy medium for me. So
Yeah. And you're not the first person who drinks water first thing. So I think I have a lot of guests who are very health conscious. So that's
yeah,
really
yeah. Well,
nice.
it's
Yeah.
it kind of wakes you out of the slumber.
That's right. That's right. So what do you consider to be your core values?
Oh man. I was raised by my grandfather and my grandmother. I was raised by my grandparents,
Oh,
growing up. Yeah, in World War II generation. So my grandfather was
right.
in the army for 35 years.
Mm.
Of course discipline, but hard work is definitely one of those. It was instilled in me at a very young age. His thought was always, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room if you're the hardest working guy in the room. That's something I just kind of carried with me. You know, so of course, hard work, tolerance, openness,
Mm.
of course, empathy, and gratitude. I saw recently, just for the as a side note, just over the weekend, I saw an interview of Michael J. Fox with Jane Pauley on the Sunday morning.
Oh, he's
And it was,
inspiring.
sorry.
Yeah. He's very inspiring.
Oh man, it was. I mean, I would
Mm.
encourage anybody to want to get on this interview. I mean, it was just unfiltered, just
Mm.
raw and open. But one of the quotes he said at the end, she asked him what keeps him going, and he says gratitude. He says because with
Oh,
gratitude, optimism is sustainable, and
nice.
that's something I'm taking
Ooh,
with
what a
me.
great quote.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something I'm taking with me. So I would definitely add that to my core values as well.
Beautiful. With gratitude, optimism is what? Is sustainable.
Sustainable,
Yeah. That's really good. That's
says
really
Michael J.
good.
Fox.
Okay. So what's one of your most important leadership practices or most useful for you?
For me, with my team, who I work with, both up and down, relationships. I really put a lot of
Mm,
emphasis on relationships, open dialogue, inclusion. Because
yeah.
I kind of feel like when you have strong relationships, that it's just not just a simple sterile, business only relationship. When you get to know each other, I think it builds a lot more cohesion
Yeah.
and a lot more synergy in the team. And it's just more personal. You spend so much time with your team. It's like, why keep it so sterile?
Yes.
So that, and of course, challenging questions.
Challenging question. Oh,
Yeah,
powerful
powerful
questions.
questions. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Are you trying to butter up the coactive teacher there?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, is it working?
That's good. That's good. No, I think relationships is a great answer anyway, right? Relationship building, like that is the core thing that even distinguishes leadership from management, really, right? Is the power of getting results through people, with people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's we're all people. It's
Yes.
like be friends.
Yes. So we've already mentioned 3 or 4 books during the episode, but do you have a book or show recommendation that you want to end with?
Oh yeah, for sure. Of course, anything with Anthony Bourdain. If anybody wants to understand how to do travel and with respect to cultures and be open and understanding and learn from it, just watch his shows. Pick an episode.
Cool.
Get online and figure out what he wants to do. But as far as books, you mentioned Zen or motorcycle maintenance. Another influence of mine I probably should have mentioned too is a guy named Wade Davis, legendary anthropologist in our time. But anything by him, Serpent and the Rainbow. But for this audience, I would recommend a book called Required Reading. The book is called Required Reading, and it's the subtitle is Climate Justice, Adaptation, and Investing in Indigenous Power. And it's really kind of a handbook. I would say for it's a bunch of essays written by Indigenous authors and allies to Indigenous people.
Yes,
but it's a handbook for grassroots advocates, Indigenous leaders, and politicians on how to incorporate Indigenous communities in their efforts toward human planet. Really good book.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. And, as we close, I just want to appreciate you. And it really feels like you're using your privilege to highlight something that matters to you, but that actually has the potential to transform the world. So I'm so grateful to have met you and to have had you as a guest on Let's Get Real.
Thank you for saying that, Nina. It has been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I wish we could keep going.
Maybe we'll come back for part 2.
That would be awesome.
Okay.